Hello everyone, today we are going to start cholinergic neurotransmitters and receptor. Myself Dr. Deepika Saini, Associate Professor at Lloyd Institute of Technology, Greater Noida. So, first of all, the neurotransmitter is a part of autonomous nervous system. It is a part of nervous system that controls and regulates the internal organs, or we can say body. Actually, it controls the involuntary responses like breathing, digestion, etc. Basically, ANS, that is autonomic nervous, one is sympathetic, another one is parasympathetic. So, when we talk about medicinal chemistry, the main aim of medicinal chemistry is to cure diseases, and when we talk about a disease, we must know a biological factor that is responsible for a particular disease. So, in the development of drugs, it is very essential to know which drug is going to interact with which receptor to produce a pharmacological effect, so that the receptor either can be suppressed or can be stimulated. So, in case of autonomous nervous system, neurotransmitter play a vital role when we talk about normal functioning or the disease states. Like neurotransmitters are the endogenous chemicals that can transmit signals across a synapse. Synapse is a point where one neuron is attached with another neuron. So, they are basically synthesized and stored in the neuron itself. When there is a need, then they get released in the synapse or the synaptic cleft. There are many neurotransmitters that play a vital role in our life, like acetylcholine, adrenaline, serotonin, dopamine and GABA. The process of this transmission of signal along with the neuron and over the synapse is known as neurotransmission, because the transmission of the message is transmitted through neurons. That is why they are known as neurotransmissions, and these signals, these can be passed over the synapse either chemically or electrically, that a message through the neuron is being transmitted. When we talk about this ANS, there is a sympathetic system and a parasympathetic system. So, actually what is the need of sympathetic and parasympathetic? They work exactly opposite to each other. Suppose if we talk about, this is sympathetic system, noradrenaline. So, in sympathetic, if it will dilate the pupil, then in case of parasympathetic, it will contract, it will lead to the constriction of the pupil. So, they work exactly opposite to each other, but there are few points to remember. The first thing, the noradrenaline, the sympathetic, is fight or flight. It means that these are the neurotransmitter that will come into play when there is sort of emergency. Like for example, if we talk about, like if someone has faced an obstacle, or we can say like a snake suddenly, so definitely that will lead to accelerate the heartbeat. That is an emergency condition. After the emergency condition has surpassed, now the parasympathetic that will come into play, that we need to control the sympathetic effect. To control or to counteract that sympathetic effect, there is parasympathetic system. Like it accelerate the heartbeat when there was an emergency condition, definitely there was acceleration in the heartbeat, but now with the help of parasympathetic we will slow down the heartbeat. Similarly, there are various other examples, like suppose if there is a condition to run. So, definitely if I want to run in an emergency condition, I need more oxygen. I need more oxygen for the whole body to move more faster. So, definitely the bronchioles will get dilated. But when we are going to counteract the sympathetic part, so in the parasympathetic there is constrictions of the bronchioles. See, and all the secretions have been increased when we talk about parasympathetic system, the cholinergic system. In this case, it will increase the secretions like the gastric secretions, or also stimulate the flow of saliva. Except sweat, all the secretions will get increased in case of parasympathetic system. So, here is a clear differentiation between the parasympathetic and sympathetic. So, starting from the eye, it will lead to contract the pupil, it will dilate. In case of salivary glands, the parasympathetic system stimulates the salivary glands to secrete more and more saliva, but in case of noradrenaline and the sympathetic system, it decreases the secretion or it leads to dry mouth in case of sympathetic. And when we talk about the heartbeat, the heart rate will get decreased in case of parasympathetic, but in case of sympathetic system it is being increased. And in case of bronchioles will get dilate in case of sympathetic and constrict in case of parasympathetic. Next is gastric juices and the peristaltic movement. Peristalsis is also inhibited in case of sympathetic and will get stimulated in the case of parasympathetic. Further, when we talk about the bile secretion, it will again we are repeating, any kind of secretion will get stimulated in case of parasympathetic. So, the cholinergic, we can say it cholinergic drugs also. So, these cholinergic drugs, those who are going to act through the parasympathetic way, will lead to increase in the secretions. Either it belongs to saliva or belong to gastric or belong to bile. Further, but it decrease the urine flow. It contracts the bladder and it in this case inhibit the bladder contraction. So, there is a difference. This was the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So, the first thing, when we talk about parasympathetic system, the first thing, the main neurotransmitter that play a key role in parasympathetic nervous system is acetylcholine, and it is a combination of acetyl and choline. So, acetylcholine, in this case we have clearly seen that this is an acetyl group which is bind with the choline group, that leads to the this combination is acetylcholine, and it is the main neurotransmitter in parasympathetic nervous system. This same molecule acetylcholine, it has a binding affinity with two different receptors. One is muscarinic, another one is nicotinic, and the point is to which receptor it is going to bind, it depends on its conformation. So, it has two different conformation, and through different conformation it binds either to the muscarinic receptor or with the nicotinic receptor. The next is synthesis of acetylcholine. So, we will start with amino acid serine. So, by taking the reactant serine, then serine decarboxylase will lead to release of carbon dioxide. So, there will be loss of carbon dioxide at this step. This carbon dioxide will get removed. So now serine is get converted into ethanolamine. So here this is 1 and 2. So this is 2 carbon chain, that is ethane, ol because it contains alcohol, amine because it contains NH2 group. So now the serine, after the action of serine decarboxylase, it gets converted into ethanolamine. After ethanolamine, there is a um, there is a enzyme that came into play, that is choline and methyl transferase. Now what will happen, this methyl group is being transferred, means here what has happened, this NH2 group is being converted into NCH3 thrice. So now this choline N methyl transferase means at the N position there will be transference of methyl group. So now methyl group has been added at N position. After this choline acetyl transferase, what will happen in this case, acetylation will take place and an acetyl group CH3 C double bond O will be incorporated in choline group. So that will lead to the synthesis of acetyl choline. So first of all there is serine, that is an amino acid. By the action of serine decarboxylase, there is removal of CO2 that will lead to the synthesis of ethanolamine, and after the action of choline N methyl transferase, there is addition of methyl group at the N position, at the nitrogen there, and lead to the formation of choline, and afterwards choline acetyl transferase. Choline acetyl transferase will lead to acetylation of choline, and hence there is formation of acetyl choline. Next is storage and release of acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is stored in the synaptical vesicles, which are released as quantums, packets we can say. When there is a nerve impulse and depolarization of the nerve terminal occurs, that lead to the influx of calcium ions, that will increase the fusion of axonal and vascular storage membrane. That's why there will be a release of acetylcholine into the cleft, and after that the released acetylcholine will bind to the target site and will produce its action. And the whole process, this binding and producing the action, that will remain bound even for less than a millisecond, means afterwards that will get detached from the receptor after producing its effect. It can be seen like this, like first of all this is the acetyl, this is choline and this is coenzyme A and acetyl coenzyme A. So through the mitochondria, coenzyme A is getting converted into acetyl coenzyme A. Now this is acetylcholine. So the first number acetylcholine is made from choline and acetyl coenzyme A. So from this acetyl group is being transferred to this choline to form acetylcholine. Now this is acetylcholine, and afterwards this is a synaptical vesicle. Now the acetylcholine is being stored in this vesicle. After this, when there is need, when there is a nerve impulse and depolarization will occur, and hence there is this acetylcholine will reach towards the end of the axon. Now this acetylcholine will get released here. This is synaptic cleft. So, this is post synaptic, this is pre-synaptic. So, this is synaptic cleft. Here the acetylcholine will get released and this acetylcholine will bind to this receptor. This is a cholinergic receptor to which acetylcholine is going to bind, and after the when this acetylcholine has produced its action, then immediately it will get hydrolyzed into acetate and choline. Now, at second position in the synaptic cleft, acetylcholine is rapidly broken down by the enzyme acetylcholinesterase. Acetylcholinesterase will hydrolyze this acetylcholine into acetate and choline. Afterwards, this choline is transported back to the axon terminal and will be used for the again for the synthesis of acetylcholine. So, when we talk about catabolism of acetylcholine, after the binding to that receptor, the immediate after showing its action, acetylcholine is rapidly metabolized through enzyme acetylcholinesterase. So, acetylcholinesterase will break down this acetylcholine into acetate and choline. So, acetylcholine is quickly hydrolyzed by acetylcholinesterase into choline and the acetate group, and that has been shown through this picture. So, when we talk about acetylcholine, it can bind to two receptors. First is muscarinic receptor. Muscarinic receptor is mainly present in central nervous system and also in ANS, and it is a part of G protein coupled receptor. When we talk about physiological functions associated with muscarinic receptors are heart rate, force and contraction of smooth muscles, and also the release of other neurotransmitters. There are 5 subtypes of muscarinic acetylcholinergic receptors, and namely M1, M2, M3, M4 and M5. So, let us have a look on the function of these 5 subtypes of the muscarinic receptors. So, let us start with the M1, the first one. The tissue where this M1 receptor located are central nervous system, gastric, salivary glands and autonomous ganglia and the enteric nerves. So, they will produce cognitive functions, and that also increases the seizure activities, increases the secretions as it is associated with gastric and salivary glands, as we have already studied that the acetylcholine has an action of cholinergic receptors, has an action on gastric and salivary gland to increase their secretion. So, they will lead to increase the secretions, and dopamine, it also inhibit the release, and dopamine release is being inhibited through these muscarinic receptors, and hence locomotion as well. So, M2 receptor, they are autonomic nerve terminals, they are present on autonomic nerve terminals, and they are present also in heart and the smooth muscles, and they lead to increase the smooth muscle contractions and also increase the tremors, hypothermia and analgesia. And apart from that, when we talk about heart, we have already discussed the cholinergic effect on the heart is to decrease the heart rate. So, M2 receptor is responsible for decreasing the heart rate. Next is M3, where it also on the CNS, smooth muscles, glands and heart. So, it also increase the smooth muscle contraction, specifically when we talk about the urinary bladder. It again, when we talk about the glands, it increase the secretion of salivary glands, also increase the food intake and also the fat deposition. So, this M3 receptor also increase the body fat deposits. It inhibit the dopamine release, and again hence it will decrease the locomotion activity. And one of the important point that it lead to synthesis of nitric oxide through the action of M3 receptor, M3 muscarinic receptor. There is synthesis of nitric oxide, and M4 and M5 they also act on CNS and peripherally, and mainly M1, M2 and M3 receptors play more important role rather than M4 and M5. So, when we talk about nicotinic receptors are agonized by the nicotine and also occur in the CNS as well as ANS, and they are exclusive in neuromuscular junctions, and they are part of ligand gated ion channel receptors. They are not G coupled protein receptors, and when we talk about nicotinic receptors, these are of two type. One is muscle type and we call them NM, and neuronal type NM, nicotinic muscle type and nicotinic neuronal type. So, muscle type, that they are located at the neuromuscular junctions, and it also allows in the muscle contraction and maintain the muscle tone. So, these when we talk about the muscle relaxant, if we talk about muscle relaxant drugs, the target for those muscle relaxant drug is NM, that is nicotinic muscle type receptor. And when we talk about neuronal type are mainly involved in the cognitive function that are associated with any kind of learning, memory, and like if this is the reason because of their this NN type receptor, that cholinergic drugs are also used in the treatment of Alzheimer's, because they are associated with cognitive function, these kind of learning and memory functions. And apart from that, and they also help in motor control and analgesia action. So, when we have a target on the learning memory, we have to target the neuronal type nicotinic receptors. So, when we talk about nicotinic receptors, there are like we have already discussed, one is muscular type, another one is neuronal type. So, here the skeleton muscle, the NM is present on skeleton muscle, and this is the location is neuromuscular junctions, as we have already discussed. This is exclusively present on neuromuscular junctions, and this is also post junctional we can say, and that will lead to the membrane response is excitatory end plate depolarization, contraction of the skeleton muscles. Next is peripheral neuronal, that is NN. It is the location is autonomic ganglia or the adrenal medulla. So, when we talk about the neuronal type nicotinic receptor, again the response is excitatory, the depolarization, but along with that it also lead to secretion of the catecholamines. So, catecholamines are secreted through the NN receptors. Apart from that, when we talk about the CNS, this is pre and post both junctional, and in this case there is a control of transmitter release we can see in case of nicotinic receptors. So, apart from that, they have also produced their effect on the central nervous system. So, to sum up, we can say the autonomic nervous system is consisted of two forms, one is parasympathetic, another one is sympathetic. So, to they are actually counteracting their actions. Like if sympathetic is increasing the heart rate, then definitely parasympathetic will produce the reverse of it, and hence that will lead to decrease in heart rate. And apart from that, when we talk about parasympathetic system acts through two receptors. One is muscarinic receptor and another one is nicotinic receptors. And muscarinic receptors, as we have discussed, are of 5 types: M1, M2, M3, M4 and M5. Basically they are acting on the secretions to enhance them. And when we talk about nicotinic receptors, they are of 2 type: muscular type as well as neuronal type. And in case of neuronal, they exhibit action on the learning and the memory part, and hence they are also used for the Alzheimer's disease. And that is why the drugs that will act through the nicotinic receptor to enhance the learning and the memory, or we can say the cognitive skills. So hence they are also used for the they are also used in the Alzheimer's disease. And this is all about the neurotransmitters and the receptors of cholinergic system. Thank you very much.